In this section, we are going to very briefly discuss the individual areas of the brainstem and briefly their function. I keep on talking about briefly, and I really mean it. So really the three main areas of the brainstem are the medulla, which is the most inferior portion. It's also known as the medulla oblongata. The pons, which is the middle portion, and the midbrain, which is the upper portion, the superior portion. So I included some of these pictures that have all the nuclei, not because you need to know all those things, but just because they're cool looking. And it gives you an idea of how much is going on in these areas. So the little line drawing on the right-hand side shows you where the medulla is, where these cross sections are being taken. So if you took a cross section at letter A, these are the nuclei that you're crossing through. So in the introductory lecture, I mentioned Sylvius 4, which is a computer brain anatomy. You can actually take cross sections and you can go up through the different areas of the brainstem, which is, you know, pretty neat. And you can mark a particular neuron or nuclei and nucleus, and you can follow it through the brainstem and see where it goes. Do we need to know that for this class? No, we don't. But someday you might want to know that stuff. The medulla contributes to controlling head and eye movements. We all know how important that is. Coordinating swallowing, that's a pretty big survival thing right there. And helping to regulate cardiovascular, respiratory, and visceral activity. Huge, important stuff happening in the medulla. The pons processes motor information from the cerebral cortex and forwards the information to the cerebellum. So the pons is fat compared to the medulla and the midbrain. When you look at the pons, and that width of it comes from all the different motor axons and axons going from the cerebral cortex to the pons and the pons to the cerebellum. So if you see one of those myelin stains, it's very dark around the pons because lots of myelin, lots of axons. There's information flowing in and flowing out. So the pontine cranial nerve nuclei process sensory information from the face, and it controls contraction of muscles involved in that processing that sensory information from the face, lateral movement of the eyes, and chewing. So the pons is also a big player in movement and survival type activities. The midbrain is the uppermost part of the brainstem, and it connects the diencephalon, which is right below the cerebrum, and the pons. The cerebral aqueduct is a small canal through the midbrain, and it joins the third and fourth ventricles where cerebrospinal fluid is held. And in chapter 24, we will talk about those fluid systems. So the midbrain, you'll see different areas that are connected to the cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebellum is not really part of the brainstem, but it is directly adjacent to the brainstem, and its function is entirely dependent on the input and output connections with the brainstem. So the cerebellum and the brainstem are really close together in the posterior fossa. And as we talked about in the cerebellum chapter, the cerebellar functions are to coordinate movement, motor planning, and cognitive functions, including rapid shifts of attention. So lots going on in the cerebellum, and lots of that information is being processed through the pons. There is a rule in the book, which you don't need to know because you don't need to remember these, but it's kind of nice for mnemonic things, recalling brainstem anatomy and arterial supply, which we're not even going to talk about. But there are the rule of four. There are four rules. There are four structures near the midline that begin with M. There are four structures to the side that begin with S. There are four cranial nerves in the medulla, 4 in the pons and 2 in the midbrain. And there are 4 motor nuclei in the brainstem that are numbers that divide equally into 12. So I like that people come up with this stuff, even though I'm not going to expect you to remember all of those things. Silly, I know.